Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 20 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, third canto. Yes, so it's our 20th day on the third canto. We're in the 7th chapter. 7th chapter is titled Further Inquiries by Vidura. And we are up to verse 37, which is in the fourth section, which is titled, Vidura wants to know of the further aspects of creation. Okay, so let us get into it. First we'll chant our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Shatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Right, okay, so here we go. Verse 37. Please describe how many disillusions there are for the elements of material nature, and who survives after the dissolutions to serve the Lord while he's asleep. Prabhupada comments in the Brahma Samhita, verses 47-48, talks of the appearance and disappearance of the universes with the breathing of Mahavishnu. So those two verses are then quoted, 47 and 48 from Brahma Samhita. So after the whole material manifestation is dissolved, the Lord and his kingdom beyond the causal ocean, means the spiritual world, do not disappear. And the inhabitants don't disappear also. They're associates of the Lord. And Prabhupada makes a very interesting, but it's also a very important point. The associates of the Lord, those who are engaged in his service, generally in the spiritual world, they're far more numerous than the living entities who have forgotten him, means all of us here in the material world. Yeah, the ones who are in the spiritual world are far more numerous than us here in wherever we are in the material world. So anyway, this verse, it refutes the impersonalists' explanation of aham in the four seed verses of the Bhagavatam. You know, it's really quite amazing how people can take something which is just so full of aham and construe it in such sort of improbable ways. So yeah, this verse refutes their explanation of the word aham, and Prabhupada goes on, the Lord and his associates remain after the dissolution. They're not destroyed. We are destroyed, at least in the physical sense. And then we go into the body of Mahavishnu. But the actual associates of the Lord, that doesn't really happen to them. So Vidura inquiring about these people is a clear indication of the existence of them and their paraphernalia. And Prabhupada also says that it's also confirmed in the Kajikanda of Padma Purana, as quoted by Jiva Goswami and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and the verses quoted, and let me just read the translation. The devotees of the Lord never annihilate their individual existences, not even after the dissolution of the entire cosmic manifestation. The Lord and the devotees who associate with him are always eternal in both the material and spiritual worlds. Okay, and on to verse 38. What are the truths regarding the living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead? What are their identities? What are the specific values in the knowledge in the Vedas? And what are the necessities for the spiritual master and his disciples? Okay, so there's a purport here. Prabhupada makes the point that, as stated many times, we're constitutionally servants of the Lord, but the Lord, in chapter 5, verse 29, Bhagavad Gita's referred to, it explains that he is the enjoyer, the proprietor, and the friend, the enjoyer of all sacrifices, penances, and just of everything, the owner of everything, and the friend of all living entities. So when a living entity accepts this and acts on that basis, then he resumes his original identity as constitutionally the eternal servant of the Lord. So, but the thing is, and this is very important, in order to achieve this, one needs association. One needs spiritual association. And the spiritual master, bona fide spiritual master, wants that disciples know the process of devotional service. And the disciples also know that they have to learn that from him. So in order to disseminate transcendental knowledge, distribute it, one has to retire from mundane activities, get out of materialistic activities on the basis of what one is learning from the spiritual master, the transcendental knowledge. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, that is the sum and substance of all the questions in this verse. So we go on to verse 39. Spotless devotees of the Lord have mentioned the source of such knowledge. How could one have knowledge of devotional service and detachment without the help of such devotees? Prabhupada makes the point. It's such an important point, and again, it's one of these points that Prabhupada is just repeatedly bringing to our attention, that there are many inexperienced people, not educated in such matters, people who advocate some form of self-realization or some idea of what they refer to as self-realization, but without the help of a spiritual master. And some of them, they sort of criticize the idea that a spiritual master is necessary and effectively try to become the spiritual master themselves, take the spiritual master's place by by advocating that a spiritual master is not necessary. But Srimad Bhagavatam doesn't approve of this idea at all. Prabhupada makes the point that even Vyas needed a spiritual master, and Narada was his spiritual master, and with the input of Narada, he prepared Srimad Bhagavatam. And, So also, Lord Chaitanya, Krishna, Lord Ram, they're the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They also accepted spiritual masters. So, you couldn't really get more authoritative than that. And we see in Bhagavad Gita how Arjuna accepted Krishna. There was no actual fire yajna initiation ceremony done on the battlefield, but there's no doubt, it's very clear that Arjuna accepted Krishna as his spiritual master, and I mean, he certainly said it on a few occasions. So the only consideration is the spiritual master has to be bona fide, which first thing must be in the disciplic succession. And then after being in the disciplic succession, it's not just a matter of that, but we also have to check what information is being given. Right, so then in the next paragraph, Prabhupada refers to the Suris. The Suris. Let me just have a look here. Suribi. Okay, the Suris are mentioned in the verse as devotees, but Prabhupada here refers to them as great scholars, but they may not be spotless. Anaga. The Anaga Suri is a pure devotee. A scholar, but he's a pure devotee also. And those who are not pure devotees are not Anaga Suris. Pure devotees, they've prepared many books on the basis of authorized Shastra, like Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada mentions, on the instruction of Lord Chaitanya, he compiled Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and various other things. So these devotees, they've written various literatures, and they're to guide the devotees, of course, and Prabhupada says the prospective devotees also. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, anyone who's very serious about raising himself to the standard of a pure devotee of the Lord must take advantage of those literatures. And verse 40, my dear sage, I've put all these questions before you with a view to knowing the pastimes of Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You are the friend of all, so kindly describe them for all those who have lost their vision. The pastimes. Describe those pastimes, please, for those people who've lost their vision. I mean, ultimately, for everybody at least, includes, of course, the great devotees, but particularly here he's referring to those who are caught up in material life, and so therefore they don't understand what to do, what not to do, but we've got to help them and give them the opportunity and try and facilitate that they can develop their vision again. So Prabhupada comments that Vidura, well, we've seen he's asked all sorts of different types of question. from different perspectives, but the idea is to understand the principles of devotional service. And Prabhupada refers to a very famous verse, Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 verse 41, which says that devotional service to the Lord is one. And the devotee's mind is one also, in the sense of not being diverted to the many branches of uncertainties. How's that? That's so well put. So Vidura's purpose was to to become firmly situated in devotional service. And in that sense, to merge without diversion. That's one way of putting it. To merge in devotional service without diversion. So he accepted Maitreya as a friend, not because of some special relationship, not because he was Maitreya's son or something like that, but because Maitreya was the friend of everyone who has lost their spiritual vision due to Maya. Verse 41, O spotless one, your answers to all these questions will grant immunity from all material miseries. Such charity is greater than all Vedic charities, sacrifices, penances, etc. Okay, so Prabhupada explains the highest perfect charity is to give people immunity from the anxieties of material life. Oh gosh, that's just, such a charity to help people like that. I remember when I first became a devotee and I was getting into it, and after a couple of weeks of chanting every day 16 rounds and doing a lot of service, I realized that Srila Prabhupada has freed me from anxiety. I had so much anxiety, it was ridiculous. But Prabhupada has freed me from it through giving me devotional service. And what a wonderful realization that was. And I celebrate it. I celebrate it every day, actually, even now, 50 years later. So that knowledge of devotional service, it's incomparable. And Prabhupada makes the point that Vedic knowledge means like karma kandya, materialistic religious knowledge, sacrifice, materialistic sacrifice, charity means materialistic charity, just to help people materially, to feed the hungry and so on, all that sort of thing. That altogether they can't even give a fraction of that immunity from anxiety that devotional service gives. It's just so true, and it's just such a wonderful point. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the charity of Maitreya not only will help Vidura, but due to its universal nature, will deliver all others in all times. And let's just add, in all places. And thus, Maitreya is immortal. It's just so wonderful. Right, okay. So now we come to the last section is just one verse. The next verse, 42. And we call that Maitreya prepares to respond. I mean, there's been so much depth into the inquiries of Vidura. It's just incredible, actually. All the different things he's been asking about. All right, anyway, let's read 42. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, "Thus, the chief of the sages, who was always enthusiastic about describing topics regarding the personality of Godhead, began to narrate the descriptive explanation of the Puranas, being so infused by Vidura. He was very much enlivened by speaking on the transcendental activities of the Lord." Right, and there's just very short purport indeed. I'll just read it. Great learned sages like Maitreya Muni are always very enthusiastic about describing the transcendental activities of the Lord. Maitreya Muni, being thus invited by Vidura to speak, appeared to be smiling because he actually felt transcendental bliss. That's wonderful. Just one point. It's a very interesting point. When Maitreya Muni first entered into the picture of Srimad Bhagavatam, it was described quite specifically that he was a mixed devotee. He's a devotee, but a mixed devotee, kind of like some element of materialism was there. But then he heard the discussion, the discussion, you could say, between the Lord and Uddhava after the battle at Prabhasa Kshetra, and that cleansed him completely. Yes. So therefore, like here in this verse and the purport, Maitreya is being very clearly presented as a great devotee. Yeah. And he's, as the verse says, very much enlivened by speaking on the transcendental activities of the Lord, and very much enlivened to speak more on the transcendental activities of the Lord. Okay, so now, devotees, we must go on to chapter 3, verse 8. Here it is. And chapter 3, verse 8 is titled Manifestation of Brahma from Garbhodakshai Vishnu. Okay, so here there are 4 sections, 33 verses altogether, so it's a shorter chapter, not very short, but a little shorter than like the last chapter was 42 verses, and I've been going on ahead with preparation, and one of the chapters, I forget if it was 26 or 25 or something, there were 72 verses. So, sure, that's really a lot. Right, so let's go through the sections. So first section from verse 1 to verse 9. How Maitreya heard Srimad Bhagavatam from Parashara. Yes, well, that's interesting. How Maitreya heard Srimad Bhagavatam from Parashara, verse 1 to verse 9. Then, the whole Lord Brahma, his position and his spiritual progress, being instructed by the Lord, and then his work of creation after that. is going to be discussed in this chapter. So the second section then, from verse 10 to verse 15, is titled, or we've titled it, The Appearance of Lord Brahma. Verse 10 to verse 15, the appearance of Lord Brahma. Then, the whole process is going to be described from his appearance right through to his receiving the knowledge. So then third section is verse 16 to verse 20, which we call Brahma's initial bewilderment. Then fourth section, verse 21 to verse 33, Brahma meditates and realizes the Lord. Verse 21 to verse 33, Brahma meditates and realizes the Lord. Excuse me. Okay. So first section, verse 1 to verse 9, how Maitreya heard Srimad Bhagavatam from Parashara. Right. So I will read the verses and then come back and read them again with their purports. So verse 1, the great sage Maitreya Muni said to Vidura, the royal dynasty of King Puru is worthy to serve the pure devotees, because all the descendants of that family are devoted to the personality of Godhead. You're also born in that family, and it's wonderful that because of your attempt, the transcendental pastimes of the Lord are becoming newer and newer at every moment. So then we go on to verse 2. Let me now begin speaking Srimad Bhagavatam. Let me now speaking, excuse me. Let me now begin speaking on the Bhagavat Purana, which was directly spoken to the great sages by the personality of Godhead. Wow. For the benefit of those who are entangled in extreme miseries. Oh, for the sake of very little pleasure. Oh gosh. Yeah, how true it is. Verse 3, some time ago, being inquisitive to know, Sanat Kumar, the chief of the boy saints, accompanied by other great sages, inquired exactly like you about the truths regarding Vasudeva, the Supreme, from Lord Sankarshan, who's seated at the bottom of the universe. Verse 4. At that time, Lord Sankarshan was meditating upon his Supreme Lord, whom the learned esteem as Lord Vasudeva. But for the sake of the advancement of the great learned sages, he slightly opened his lotus-like eyes and began to speak. 5. The sages came from the highest planets down to the lower region through the water of the Ganges, and therefore the hair on their heads was wet. They touched the lotus feet of the Lord, which are worshipped with various paraphernalia by the daughters of the serpent king when they desire good husbands. Verse 6. The four Kumars, headed by Sanat Kumar, who all knew the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, glorified the Lord in rhythmic accents with selected words full of affection and love. At that time, Lord Sankarshan, with his thousands of raised hoods, began to radiate an effulgence from the glowing stones on his head. What a description. It's so beautiful. Verse 7, Lord Sankarshan thus spoke the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam to the great sage Sanat Kumar, who had already taken the vow of renunciation. Sanat Kumar also, in his turn, when inquired of by Sankyayana Muni, explained Srimad Bhagavatam as he had heard it from Sankarshan. 8. The great sage Sankyayana was the chief amongst the transcendentalists, and when he was describing the glories of the Lord in terms of Srimad Bhagavatam, it so happened that my spiritual master, Parashara, and Brihaspati both heard him. 9. The great sage Parashara, as aforementioned, being so advised by the great sage Pulastya, spoke unto me the foremost of the Puranas, the Bhagavatam. I shall also describe this before you, my dear son, in terms of my hearing, because you are always my faithful follower. Right, okay, so let's go back to the beginning and go through the verses again with their purports. Verse 1. The great sage Maitreya Muni said to Vidura, the royal dynasty of King Puru is worthy to serve the pure devotees, because all the descendants of that family are devoted to the personality of Godhead. You're also born in that family, and it is wonderful that because of your attempt, the transcendental pastimes of the Lord are becoming newer and newer at every moment. So Prabhupada makes the point that Maitreya has thanked Vidura for the questions. Yeah. What wonderful questions. They're so nice that I really feel obliged to you and grateful. So he thanked him and praised him by referring to his family. Yes, the Purus, full of devotees, not the impersonalists or the Paramatma people, yeah. But directly the Supreme Lord, devotees of the Lord. So because Vidura was a member of that family, and the family is, there's so many, maybe not all, but, well, not all actually, because, Duryodhana is a member of the family. But the great majority, they're great devotees, so naturally, Vidura, because he's one of them, naturally he spread the glories of the Lord. And therefore Maitreya was really happy to get the association of Vidura. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, he, which is Maitreya, considered the company of Vidura most desirable because such association can accelerate one's dormant propensities for devotional service. Verse 2. Let me now begin speaking on the Bhagavat Purana, which was directly spoken to the great sages by the personality of Godhead for the benefit of those who are entangled in extreme miseries for the sake of very little pleasure. It's just, it makes one think of where one is coming from. Okay, so let's have a look at the purport here to verse 2. Maitreya is proposing to speak on the Bhagavatam because it was compiled and it was compiled in disciplic succession, and comes down in parampara disciplic succession. And it's just such a wonderful thing. Only people who are really fortunate get the opportunity to hear it in the association of pure devotees. Yeah. And I remember, I could just comment an experience of mine. I think 1991 it was, I'm sure it was. I attended the VIHE for the first time, and as a student. And one of the courses I took was Nectar of Devotion, which was presented by His Holiness Giriraj Swami Maharaj. And I remember very vividly, I had read the book already approximately 4 times, I think not less, maybe even 5 times. Yes, so in other words, I felt I know Nectar of Devotion. I mean, at least I've got a pretty good idea of what is Nectar of Devotion, having read it myself a number of times. But then we did the seminar for 1 month. And of course, Maharaj is very, very good, very nice presenter. Plus, there was so much discussion and just going more deeply into different points as they come up in the Nectar of Devotion. And so by the time we finished, after 1 month, an hour a day, 5 days a week, for 1 month, I felt I have not read Nectar of Devotion before. It was just like my eyes had been opened. Yeah. So therefore, only the fortunate get the opportunity to hear Srimad Bhagavatam or Nectar of Devotion in the association of pure devotees. So, but otherwise, under the spell of Maya, the living entities are trapped in bondage with so many difficulties. But the result is very little happiness. And ultimately, it may be no happiness, it may be just more misery. So therefore, those people don't know the implications of that process. Yeah, of fruitive activities, in other words. Yeah, being in the bondage under the spell of the material energy. So they think the body is the self, of course, and they're foolishly very attached to it. And so they think they can continue with material paraphernalia forever. So, and Prabhupada makes the point, this is really, it's a point which has already been made many times, but let's make it again, that this misconception that the body is the self and that we can just continue enjoying with material facility forever, this misconception is so strong that they continue life after life under the external energy. So, but otherwise, Prabhupada explains, if one comes in contact with the book Bhagavatam and the person Bhagavat, who really knows the book Bhagavatam, then that person gets out of material entanglement. We have heard from Srimad Bhagavatam, from Srila Prabhupada. We've heard Srimad Bhagavatam from Srila Prabhupada. Let us hear again and again. And in this way we'll get out of material entanglement. Yes, we may have, or some of us may have already. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore Sri Maitreya Muni, out of compassion for the suffering men in the world, proposes to speak on the Srimad Bhagavatam first and last. In other words, he's just going to focus completely on Srimad Bhagavatam. All right, so now verse 3. Some time ago, being inquisitive to know, Sanat Kumar, the chief of the boy saints, accompanied by other great sages, inquired exactly like you about the truths regarding Vasudeva, the Supreme, from Lord Sankarshan, who's seated at the bottom of the universe. So there's a short purport here. This is in clarification of the statement that the Lord spoke directly on Srimad Bhagavatam. Yeah, okay, and so it's mentioned then, when and unto whom the Bhagavatam was spoken is explained here. Right. So it's not just that he spoke Srimad Bhagavatam, but when he spoke it, who he spoke it to, this is all being discussed here. And Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, questions similar to those put forward by Vidura were asked by great sages like Sanat Kumar at that other time, and Lord Sankarshan, the plenary expansion of the Supreme Lord Vasudeva, answered them. It's fairly straightforward, although highly transcendental. At that time, Lord Sankarshan was meditating upon his Supreme Lord, whom the learned esteem as Lord Vasudeva. But for the sake of the advancement of the great learned sages, he slightly opened his lotus-like eyes and began to speak. So actually there's no purport here to verse 4. Let's go on to verse 5. The sages came from the highest planets down to the lower region, through the water of the Ganges, and therefore the hair on their heads was wet. They touched the lotus feet of the Lord, which are worshipped with various paraphernalia by the daughters of the serpent king when they desire good husbands. Okay, so this purport here, Prabhupada says, the Ganges, of course we know about this, the Ganges flows directly from the feet of the Lord, and it runs from the highest planet of the universe down to the lowest. So when the sages from all over, even the sages from the highest planets, they came down when they heard that this was going to happen. They came down from Satyaloka by the Ganges, by the power of their mystic yoga. So Prabhupada makes the point that if a river flows thousands of miles, a perfect yogi can immediately go from one place to another by dipping in its water. Right. And the Ganges is the only celestial river which flows throughout the universe. And therefore the sages travel by it all over the universe. So Prabhupada says the statement that their hair was wet indicates it was moistened by the Ganges from the lotus feet of the Lord. And whoever touches the Ganges water to his head touches the feet of the Lord and becomes free from sin. And therefore, if after taking Ganga Snan or being washed of sins, a man avoids further sins, he is delivered. Yes. But if he sins again, his bath in the Ganges is only as good as an elephant taking bath and then rolling in the dust. Famous example. So on we go to verse 6. The four Kumars headed by Sanat Kumar, who all knew the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, glorified the Lord in rhythmic accents with selected words, full of affection and love. At that time, Lord Sankarshan, with his thousands of raised hoods, began to radiate an effulgence from the glowing stones on his head. So Prabhupada explains the Lord is sometimes addressed as Uttama Shloka, which means one who is worshipped with select words by devotees. And Prabhupada, it's just such an interesting way to put it. A profusion of such words comes from a devotee who's fully absorbed in love for devotional service of the Lord. Yeah, so Maitreya, he's on that level actually, despite, as I mentioned earlier in the Bhagavatam, being described as a materialistic devotee or mixed devotee of some sort. Yes, and Prabhupada then makes the point, though, that there are many instances in which even a small boy who's a great devotee has offered excellent prayers in choice words, glorifying the pastimes of the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in other words, without the development of fine affection and love, one cannot offer prayers to the Lord very suitably. Verse 7, Lord Sankarshan thus spoke the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam to the great sage Sanat Kumar, who'd already taken the vow of renunciation. Sanat Kumar also, in his turn, when inquired of by Sankyayana Muni, explained Srimad Bhagavatam as he had heard it from Sankarshan. So, Srila Prabhupada makes the point. This is the way of parampara, disciplic succession. Although Sanat Kumar was perfect, still he heard Srimad Bhagavatam from Lord Sankarshan. And then when Sanat Kumar was questioned later on in the Bhagavatam, he spoke the same message he'd heard from Sankarshan. So, verse 8. The great sage, Sankyayana, was the chief among the transcendentalists, and when he was describing the glories of the Lord in terms of Srimad Bhagavatam, it so happened that my spiritual master Parashara and Brihaspati both heard from him. Right. So there's no purport to this verse. Let us just read verse 9. The great sage Parashara, as aforementioned, being so advised by the great sage Pulastya, spoke unto me the foremost of the Puranas, the Bhagavatam. I shall also describe this before you, my dear son, in terms of my hearing, because you're always my faithful follower. All right, so let's have a look at the purport. So Prabhupada makes interesting point at the beginning of the purport. The great sage Pulastya is the father of all demoniac descendants. Yes. And once Parashara began a sacrifice in which all demons were to be burnt to death because his father had been killed and eaten by one of them. So then Vasishta came and asked Parashara to stop that. And because Vasishta was so respectable, Parashara agreed. So when this happened, Pulastya, the father of the demons, was so happy, he blessed Parashara that he would be a great speaker on the Puranas. That's interesting, isn't it? So Parashara's action was appreciated by Pulastya because Parashara had forgiven the demons, out of his Brahminical power of forgiveness. Wow. And Parashara, he could have destroyed all the demons in the sacrifice, but he considered that demons have such natures, they eat men and animals, but why, because of this, should he withdraw his Brahminical qualification of forgiveness? Yeah. Right. So therefore, Parashara first spoke on Srimad Bhagavatam because it was the foremost of the Puranas. So now Maitreya wanted to narrate the same Bhagavatam he heard from Parashara, and Vidura was qualified to hear it because of his faithfulness and because he was always following the instructions of superiors. So in this way, devotees, Srimad Bhagavatam has been narrated from time immemorial by Parampara, even before the time of Vyasadeva. I mean, that's a very significant point, isn't it? So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the so-called historians calculate the Puranas to be only a few hundred years old, but factually the Puranas existed from time immemorial, before all historical calculations by the mundaners and speculative philosophers. So, okay, devotees, we go on to the second section, the appearance of Lord Brahma, from verse 10 to verse 15. And I'll read the verses, just the verses first of all. 10. At that time, when the three worlds were submerged in water, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu was alone, lying on his bedstead, the great sage Ananta. And although he appeared to be in slumber in his own internal potency, free from the action of the external energy, his eyes were not completely closed. Verse 11. Just like the strength of fire within fuel wood, the Lord remained within the water of dissolution, submerging all the living entities in their subtle bodies. He lay in the self-invigorated energy called Kala. Interesting. Okay, 12. The Lord lay down for 4,000 yuga cycles in his internal potency, and by his external energy, he appeared to be sleeping within the water. When the living entities were coming out for further development of their fruitive activities, actuated by the energy called Kala Shakti, he saw his transcendental body as bluish. Okay, let's go on to verse 13. The subtle subject matter of creation on which the Lord's attention was fixed was agitated by the material mode of passion, and thus the subtle form of creation pierced through his abdomen. And there's no purport there to verse 13, so verse 14, piercing through the sum total form of the fruitive activity of the living entities took the shape of the bud of a lotus flower generated from the personality of Vishnu, and by his supreme will, it illuminated everything like the sun and dried up the vast waters of devastation. And verse 15, into that universal lotus flower, Lord Vishnu personally entered as the Supersoul, and when it was thus impregnated with all the modes of material nature, the personality of Vedic wisdom, whom we call the self-born, was generated. Okay. All right, devotees, let's just that's the end of that section. There's not so much in the way of purports here. So I think what we'll do, we will continue. We'll go back to the beginning of this second section, verse 10, and read through and go through the purports, 2 or 3 purports that there are. We'll do that tomorrow. Okay? So we'll finish here. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.